So a worker for Smithfield Foods is suing that company over what they say are unsafe working practices. And this is a worker who works on the cut floor at a Smithfield Foods meat processing plant, an unbelievably dangerous and difficult line of work to start with, even in the best of times. But of course, during coronavirus, Smithfield specifically has had major coronavirus outbreaks at many of their plants. This plant in particular, though, they have not shut down. And according to this worker, they have done next to nothing to try to protect these individuals who work in incredibly close quarters, doing this very difficult work with very little in the way of personal protective equipment, no ability really to take time off. In fact, they offered a cash bonus for people to avoid missing work, so they're actively encouraging people to make sure they come into work. And this again goes to show you like the priorities of these major companies, and especially we've seen this recurringly in the meat processing industry, where you have a largely immigrant workforce, largely low-income workers, and their safety is being put at a lower priority than just making sure that those shelves are stocked and that business continues on as usual. I do want to say this was a Washington Post article. A Smithfield executive vice president of corporate affairs and compliance said that the company has a policy of not commenting on pending litigation. The health and safety of our employees is our top priority at all times. The allegations contained in the complaint are without factual or legal merit and include claims previously made against the company that have been investigated and determined to be unfounded. So that is their response.
That's their response. And look, this worker says, I know of at least 8 workers at my plant who stayed home because they had symptoms of coronavirus. But I think, look, it's an impossible situation for everybody involved, because one of the things I wanted to note on this is Tyson Foods, that company is out with a full-page ad in the New York Times warning about, quote, the food supply chain is breaking. They say that millions of pounds of meat are going to disappear from the supply chain as the coronavirus pandemic is pushing food processing plants to close. And what does this really show? Is that when a company, which is essential, right? I mean, is there anything more essential than make food processing plants, and workers are essential? Who is the mediating force which is supposed to take care of that? It's the government. And so, look, I really don't blame Smithfield Foods and Tyson Foods, because I think they are in an impossible situation. And I think the workers are in one too, which is mean that we need to have the government step in to ensure personal protective equipment, right? In order to make sure that you can even take liability off of this by ensuring that you can pay hazard pay towards the workers. These are all things which we're totally able to do, right? Is to be about allocating essential worker pay. I think Irami Frimpong on the show talked about how every hazard worker should be getting $30 an hour. And that's something that you can actually do through legislation, distribution, through the essential workforce, which is putting their lives on the line. And this is something that the government, again, can handle. They did it during 9/11 for firefighters and first-line responses. This is the similar emergency situation that we're in right now. And this just goes, again, the public policy failure that we've left people in right now.
It's a public policy failure. It is also a deep cultural, moral failure. Because when you have workers such as these in these incredibly difficult, low-paid, dangerous, yet essential jobs, who are not even in the best of times compensated appropriately for this very difficult work that they're taking on. And then you layer on top of that a pandemic. And yes, these are essential functions, but you can't expect to put, that's essentially what's happened, is you have put that food processing above the lives of these workers. And look, okay, but you have to compensate them appropriately. Exactly. You have to take every measure you possibly can to protect them. But instead, as a society, we have completely devalued these individuals, and it becomes blatantly obvious during a pandemic situation where you're literally asking low-paid workers to risk their lives for nothing in terms of additional compensation for that risk.
And that's really what I think is it. Look, it's the government's job is to secure our safety and our security. And part of that, and look, we understand this very well in wartime, right? Like, how do you think we treat steel workers during World War II? And how did we look at some of these jobs? Is that it was recognized as an essential public benefit, and then there were distributive resources accordingly. That's what we have to do in this situation. But this conversation is not, by the way, this is not happening left or right in Washington, right? Like, no nobody is actually pushing for additional workforce or protections for any of these things. It's
certainly not these individuals. Not even hazard pay for frontline medical workers has been passed yet.
Right.
I mean,
and
it's
so
insane.
There's no. I mean, we're so far behind the conversation, and this is what's going to happen, which is that Tyson's Foods and all these other companies, which are facing massive liability and also massive demand, are going to have to decide to put workers at risk or to meet the food supply chain because millions of people need meat in the grocery store, or they have to close stores down. And it's just, and by the way, putting the workers to work without personal protective equipment is also a disaster. It's just a huge failure. It's a public, like I said, it's a public policy failure from the very beginning.
And Smithfield Foods, they shut down a number of their plants because they had coronavirus outbreaks. One in South Dakota in particular, hundreds of their workers. And so this is not like an idle, imaginary threat that these workers are living with. And I just want to read you the beginning. This is, again, Washington Post op-ed written by this worker, an anonymous worker, just describing what that job is like on a daily basis. Put the pandemic aside. On the cut floor at Smithfield Foods, the meat processing company where I work, we use knives to butcher up to 1,100 pigs an hour as they come down a mechanical line into specific cuts like a loin. To keep up with the speed of the line, workers stand so closely together they can easily be cut by the person next to them. It was a dangerous, hard job every day before the coronavirus. So again, 1,100 pigs an hour that they are butchering. That is the job for incredibly low pay, dangerous conditions, and then now also dealing with the pandemic with very little response or additional safety being given.
It was a tough job before all of this, and now it's an essential job. And look, we all need food, so somebody needs to take care of it.
Yep, absolutely. We'll have more Rising for you after this.